Giant of the automobile industry. A horny-handed, husky young railroad mechanic visited the 1908 Chicago Motor Show and fell in love with a $5,000 car, the Locomobile. He borrowed most of the money from a bank. The gleaming horseless carriage was freighted to his home in Eelwyn, Iowa. A team of horses dragged it from the railroad station to a barn. Its new owner was not interested in driving it. He only wanted to take it to pieces and put it together again. After scores of such operations, he really knew what made a motor car tick. The young mechanic was Walter Percy Chrysler, though a few years were to pass before he got his chance in the automobile industry. He went on with prodigious speed to become one of the great manufacturers of the world. When Chrysler was born on April 2, 1875, in the little town of Wamego on the rolling Kansas plains, in due course his father, a driver on the Union Pacific Railroad, got young Walter a job in the railway machine shops as a floor sweeper at 5 cents an hour. At 15 he became a machinist's apprentice. He made his own tools, including a lathe. Before he was 18, Walter built a 4-foot model of the steam engine his father drove. Still an apprentice, he made his mark by repairing a broken cylinder head in half the usual time to get an urgently needed locomotive back on the run. Walter Chrysler was foreman over 90 men when he completed his apprenticeship. Before he was 25, he was on the then large salary of $140 a month, in control of 1,000 men. He married at 26 and moved round the country from job to job, hauling himself out of overalls into the executive class. In 1908, when he bought his first motor car merely to tinker with, he was foreman mechanic of the Eelwyn shops of the Chicago Great Western Railroad. Later that year, he became the line superintendent of motive power at $350 a month. An argument with the railroad president, who was adamant there was no higher position in the company for anyone with only mechanical training, caused Chrysler to throw up his job at 34 and move to Pittsburgh. He went back to overalls as foreman for an engineering company making all kinds of machines. In 18 months, Chrysler was works manager. In 1911, he jumped at a chance to become works manager of the Buick plant at General Motors, even though it meant a salary drop from $12,000 to $6,000 a year. When he arrived, the output was from 15 to 40 cars a day. When he left, it was up to 550 cars a day. 3 years passed. He was still on $6,000 a year. He bearded the General Motors president, Charles Nash, summarized what he had done, and demanded $25,000. Chrysler got his raise. He took it with a warning he would want $50,000 the following year. In 1915, General Motors fell under the control of William C. Durant, a business genius who had founded the company but later lost it through financial difficulties. Durant sent for Chrysler and offered him the presidency of the Buick Company. Chrysler was not over-enthusiastic because he was negotiating with bankers to take over a small car manufacturing concern of his own. Without haggling, Durant snapped, "I'll give you $500,000. Chrysler stayed. He steered Buick to a profit of $50 million a year, had his own salary doubled, and became production chief of the whole General Motors organization. He threw it up in 1919 after an argument with Durant. As a millionaire and not yet 45, Chrysler decided to retire. But before 12 months passed, his wife was tired of having him lounging unhappily around the house. She ordered him back to work, so he went out and landed a $1 million a year job to resuscitate the languishing Willys Overland Motor Company. With the bank liabilities of $46 million, the concern was headed straight for liquidation. Chrysler put it on an even keel and reduced the debts to $18 million in a few months. He still hankered for a concern of his own. The bankers were so impressed at the way he saved Willys that they introduced him to another languishing business, the Maxwell Motor Company, which was in an even more parlous state. A satisfactory financial arrangement was made. If Chrysler could get the bankers to back the $25 million that he had lent the Maxwell Company and almost written off as lost, he could have the business. Chrysler finished his 2-year contract with Willys and revitalized the Maxwell Company on the side. He even knew the trouble with the latter, their car. It had a bad name with the public. The rear axles had a habit of sagging while in motion and spilling the differential out into the nearest gutter. As a result, the company had on its hand 26,000 apparently unsaleable Maxwell cars and were producing more. Chrysler went to work and devised 2 trusses to hold up the axle. Then he reduced prices to show a mere $5 profit per car. By the end of 1922, he had disposed of the lot, plus the cars the firm had produced in the meanwhile. With the cash he paid off the bankers. He now had his own company. The name was changed a couple of years later to the Chrysler Corporation, but it was obvious he could not keep in business selling Maxwell cars for $5 profit. The answer was a new car. The answer was a new car. He had one in his mind that he had been developing since he first bought the Locomobile back in 1908. It had a new high-compression engine. His principal selling point was to provide power, comfort, and refinements previously available only in luxury models, selling at $5,000 for $15,000. He put all the knowledge he had into producing a rich man's car at a poor man's price and still show a profit. He knew he could do it, but for a while it seemed he was not to get a chance. Bankers who promised to take $5 million worth of Chrysler bonds to finance the new car backed out till they had proof of public demand. Proof to them were orders taken for new cars at the annual motor show. To his chagrin, Chrysler was refused space for the car at the 1924 show in Chicago. He promptly hired the lobby of the Commodore Hotel just down the street and put on his own motor show of the new Chrysler. It was soon evident from the flocking crowds that Chrysler had stolen the show and had a winner in his car. One of the bankers rushed round and offered to take the $5 million in bonds at $70 per $100 bond. Chrysler had to have the money in a few days or his factory would close. He was not as financially naive, however, as the banker thought. The reply of the hard-swearing, hard-working former mechanic was expressive and not pretty. Some hours later he made a deal with another banker who took all the bonds at $95. He did not look back. He sold 32,000 Chryslers in his first year of business for a profit of $4,115,000. When he started, there were 100 companies producing motor cars in the United States. In 2 years, Chrysler was in 5th position. By 1928, Chrysler realised he must produce an even cheaper car if he was going to hold his position against the ever-expanding Ford and General Motors. He paid out $170 million for the Dodge Company, primarily to get their huge plant and selling organisation, to put over his low-priced Plymouth. The old, established, dependable Dodge Company was not used to Chrysler drive and energy. When the final papers were signed, banker Clarence Dillon, who arranged the deal, congratulated him. He remarked it was a fine, solid company. The plant and organisation should give him no worry. He could let it run itself for 3 months while he arranged the details of assuming the management. "Hell, Clarence," snorted Chrysler, "my boys are already moving in. I gave them a signal when you signed that last paper." On that signal, Chrysler staff in a number of cities were alerted by telephone. They swarmed into the Dodge plants, like a company of Marines occupying a position. To the gates were tacked huge placards already prepared and reading, "Chrysler Corporation, Dodge Division." Realising the value of name advertising, Walter Chrysler in 1929 poured out 14 millions of his personal fortune to create what was intended to be the highest building in the world. The Chrysler Building stands on the corner of Lexington Avenue and 42nd Street, New York. It was, however, soon topped by the Empire State Building, but it remains one of the skyscraping wonders of the city. Chrysler drove at full speed into the 1930 Depression. His faith in his own company was unshaken. He gleefully picked up great blocks of shares at bargain prices. He weathered the storm and by 1933 had forged ahead so successfully that he had overtaken Ford in sales. A multi-millionaire, Walter Chrysler was still at heart a mechanic. He always carried a full toolkit in his own car to help any motorist in trouble he met on the road. After fixing the stranded vehicle, Walter Chrysler would produce his card. The surprised motorist was informed he would be wiser if in future he bought a more dependable car from Chrysler. Chrysler's executives were invariably men like himself who had started their careers in overalls. Until he died of cerebral hemorrhage in 1940, Chrysler drummed into them ceaselessly the creed on which he was sure his success depended: doing a little more than is expected of you and more than you are being paid for.